Part 120. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1193. The 6 children were all left in the county palace by Fan Zijian. He no longer mentioned to teach them about conspiracy, but strictly prohibited them from doing childish actions against Mu Bowen. He said, if you really hate him, you can tell the adults you can keep your displeasure in your heart if you file a complaint, but you must be respectful to him on the surface, because he is your elder. It's good that Mu Bowen is open-minded. If you meet someone with a narrow heart and a bright face, you don't know that you will hold grudges when you tease him like this. Fan Zijian said in a deep voice, the most taboo in the officialdom is the hidden enemy, because they usually won't take action against you, even your relatives and friends, but when it comes to critical times, they don't mind pushing you if they have a chance, and this is the most dangerous thing. The 3 older children opened their mouths wide, before Xiaoan whispered, Uncle Mu doesn't look like that kind of person. Fan Zijian looked at him seriously, and asked, you said it as if, do you dare to pat your chest to ensure that everyone you tease is an open-minded person? Xiaoan was silent, and the little lion and tiger head looked around and thought seriously, and finally frowned in the same distress. Fan Zijian said flatly, let's talk about who I am first. Hutu was the first to call out, second uncle is the smartest person. Fan Zijian smiled and asked, is that a good person? Hutu nodded without hesitation, the second uncle is of course a good man. Fan Zijian looked at little lion and Xiaoan, and the 2 children proudly straightened their chests and nodded at him. This made Fan Zijian feel very happy. He touched their heads and said, of course I am a good person to you, because I love you, I will give you whatever you want, I will wipe your ass if you get into trouble, even if you tease me, I will be angry for a while, but what about others? Fan Zijian said indifferently, to others, I am just a narrow-minded villain. If he is useful to the country, I will naturally not take action against them, but if he is useless, I will not bear to humiliate me. People, children, you have to remember that no one in this world will tolerate your behavior unconditionally except your close relatives, and Mu Bowen is beyond the category of close relatives, so you still have to make an apology to him after you go back. Apologies, no matter how unhappy you are in your heart, bury it in my heart, and be respectful to me on the face, don't let people find out the mistakes. The 3 children looked at him in shock. This was different from the education they had received since they were young. Both the 4th uncle and the 4th aunt told them that if they were dissatisfied with someone, they should bring it up to that person. If not, they would go their separate ways. And do not deliberately hide it. But now Fan Zijian told them to hold it in their hearts, and then dealt with it with a hypocritical face. Fan Zijian didn't care about dropping a bomb among the 3 children and went to court, leaving the 3 children in the palace to study in a daze. At this time, Mu Bowen was asking his sister distressedly, how can I win their favor? Mu Yangling shook his head honestly, think about it yourself. Sister, Mu Bowen looked at her pitifully. Mu Yangling took a sip of the thick and fragrant almond tea, and said, Hutu and the others are still children, and their likes and dislikes are temporary. They may forget about it after a while. You also said it's possible, Mu Bowen said distressedly, if father and mother know that I've come and offended 2 nephews, they will scold me to death. That's what you deserve. Why do you have to drive them back when you're full and have nothing to do? Mu Bowen's eyes widened, and he asked, Sister, Hutu and the others are studying in the palace, how could they worship Lin White as their teacher? You let them go to Songshan Academy to mess around like this. Why can't they worship Lin White as their teacher? No matter whether they enter Songshan Academy for nonsense or not, that is their own choice. As long as they don't violate the regulations of Songshan Academy, they have to try whether they succeed or not. If they succeed, they will decide do it, and let them bear it if they fail. Why do we adults care so much? Mu Bowen was at a loss for words for a moment. He didn't know whether to say that his sister was too indulgent to the children, or to comment that she didn't care about the children. Mu Yangling felt that Bo Wen was too worried. She put down her teacup and sighed, they are already 10 years old, and Xiaoan is mature in mind, no less than ordinary 13 or 14-year-old children. In this era, this age your child can already be half of the family. Didn't I let you do what you like when you are so old? At that time, you chose to go to the nursery, so I invited you to teach you to read. At that time, did I stop you from going to the nursery because you wanted to study? Mu Bowen was silent. Mu Yangling patted him on the shoulder and said, you should think about how to repair the relationship between the two parties. As a sister, I would like to remind you friendlily that both the tiger head and the little lion like to listen to Xiaoan's ideas, and Xiaoan and the little lion are always willing to accommodate the tiger's head. The little lion is the best at observing, so Xiaoan likes to ask the little lion's opinion before making up her mind. As for the three small ones, I guess they took advantage of Xiaoan and the others to unite and isolate you. If you can please the three big ones, the three small ones will be easy. Mu Bowen opened his mouth wide, so his sister was telling him that Xiaoan, the tiger head and the little lion must all be missing? Mu Bowen has been obedient and precocious since he was a child. He really doesn't know what such a mischievous 10-year-old child would like. He can only turn to his 6-year-old son Yuan Yuan for help. But Yuan Yuan said that he was helpless. He looked at his father sympathetically and said, cousins play differently from me. I like to play with my cousin Ziofu. You haven't seen the toys of cousin Hutu and the others. There are so many toys. Yuan Yuan made a big circle and sighed, there are so many toys that I have never seen before, they are amazing. Mu Bowen wondered what kind of gift he would like when he was 10 years old. He is very happy with a book, a set of pen, ink, paper and inkstone, or even a new set of clothes, but will Hutu and the others be rare? A better gift, parents and sister take their family out for a picnic. Father stays with him for a long time at home. Mu Bowen shook his head and asked his son, do your cousins like to go out and play? Like picnics or something? Yuan Yuan sighed, patted his father on the shoulder in an old-fashioned way, Daddy, I must be very happy to give this gift to me, but my cousin and the others are not sure. Cousin Ziofu said that every month my eldest uncle would take them to the countryside for horseback riding or hunting, outings in spring, swimming in the lake in summer, hunting in autumn, and going to hot springs and hunting in winter. Do you think my cousins will rarely go out for outings? Mu Bowen. No wonder these brats are so rampant, they are having a great time, right? The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1194. Mu Bowen really couldn't think of any good way to improve the relationship between the two parties, because these brats had a good life and seemed to have nothing missing, so he could only use the most common method to try. For example, when he went to the street, he saw some gadgets and bought them back for them. Because the children were still living with Fan Zijian, he didn't see their reactions. He, on the other hand, delivered more and more smoothly. Every day when he returned to the palace, he would get out of the carriage and go for a walk before buying some small things. He even had a share for Yuan Yuan and his two sons who were only able to sit still. Yuan Yuan exclaimed that every day was like New Year's Eve happiness. Hutu and the others stayed at Fan Zijian's place for 2 days, and came back together as soon as the holiday came. The three young ones went to look for Mu Bowen as soon as they entered the door, and they all liked the little gift he gave them. The three big ones looked at each other before passing. Mu Bowen patted the heads of the three small ones, raised his head and said to the three big ones, Xiaoan, Tiger Head, Little Lion, Uncle wants to apologize to you, and should not force you to come back at the gate of Songshan Academy regardless of your wishes. Hearing that Mu Bowen apologized before them, no matter it was Xiaoan, the Little Lion, or the Tiger Head, they were a little embarrassed, and said sincerely, Uncle, we were not good before, we sneaked into your study and locked the door, and arrested you. A lot of bugs were thrown into your study. Mu Bowen laughed and said, "It's okay, Uncle is not afraid of bugs, but you can't play tricks on others like this in the future." The three nodded. Mu Bowen wanted to continue his pleasing business, and asked with a smile, "You guys take a rest tomorrow, why don't I take you out for an outing?" The three little ones and cheered when they heard the words, "Going out to play always makes people happy." The three older ones shook their heads unanimously and said, "Uncle, take the younger brothers, we won't go." Mu Bowen was puzzled, "Do you have any plans for tomorrow?" Xiaoan said embarrassedly, "Uncle Mu, our husband has assigned us a lot of homework, we have to stay at home and do our homework." "Really, are these children so hard-working? This is different from what I heard." Mu Bowen glanced at his sister who was playing chess against the chess record. Seeing that she was indifferent, he could only keep his doubts in his heart. Although he couldn't find someone to apologize to, he had already made a promise that Mu Bowen still set aside a day to accompany a few children on an outing in the countryside. The three older ones woke up early the next morning. Tigerhead and Little Lion went to the martial arts arena early to fight boxing, while Xiaoan held a book and read aloud towards Dehua, and went back to the study to do homework as soon as the usual amount was completed. Lidong, who served the three of them, saw that they had started to do their homework early, and almost lost her eyes in shock. She hurriedly brought milk and snacks for the three young masters, and then slowly left the study. As soon as he left the study, Lidong hurried to the backyard. It just so happened that Chi Heiran also took a rest today, a rare lazy day, and was sleeping soundly while holding Mu Yangling. Li Dong pulled Li Chun over, and said in a low voice, "Young masters, I'm afraid you're going to get into trouble again." Li Chun's eyelids twitched for a while, looked at the inner room, and said in a low voice, "Look at them first, the prince and princess are not awake yet." Lidong was very worried, and said unconfidently, "Can I keep an eye on the three young masters?" Li Chun coughed lightly, held her hand and encouraged, "You can definitely do it." Lidong could only go back with a bitter face. Fortunately, the three young masters didn't want to sneak away, and honestly did their homework in the study until they had breakfast. Li Shun had already reported to Chi Heiran and Mu Yangling, and while Mu Yangling was serving breakfast, Chi Heiran looked at the three of them refreshed and asked, "What are you going to do today?" The tiger head looked at the little lion. The little lion lowered his head in meditation. Xiaoan looked up and explained with a smile, "We will go out to play after doing our homework for a while." Chi Heiran patted Hutu on the head, "Don't always look at your brothers, you have to have your own ideas, you know." Hutu argued, "I have my own idea, and mine is the same as theirs, so just wait for their explanation. Don't you know that you look very guilty when you look at their little eyes? Others know that you are going to do bad things just by looking at them." The little lion and Little One suddenly looked at the tiger's head condemningly. Hutu blushed, and argued, "I've always looked at them like this, Daddy, you must have known that we were going to do bad things before, and that's why you treated us like this." Mu Yangling was drinking the soup and almost spit it out. Xiaoan and the little lion really glared at him now. Chi Heiran was also happy to show his big white teeth, grabbed him and asked, "Come on, tell Daddy what big bad thing you are going to do." Hutu shut his mouth tightly and did not speak. Mu Bowen looked around, and finally chose to rescue the three children. "Brother-in-law, let's eat first, and we can talk after dinner, my sister knows about this." Chi Heiran looked at Mu Yangling suspiciously. Mu Yangling calmly made a steamed bun for him, and said, "Eat it." After breakfast, Mu Bowen retreated early with Yuan and the three younger ones, while Chi Heiran interrogated Mu Yangling and the three older ones, "Tell me, what are you hiding from me?" Mu Yangling sent the three older ones away directly, "Go do your homework, I'll tell him." The three big ones ran away in a hurry. "Hey, these brats run really fast." Chi Heiran turned his head to look at Mu Yangling, "Why didn't I know they were in trouble again?" "It's not a disaster, it's just that they want to worship Lin White as their teacher." Chi Heiran felt relieved. Apprenticeship is indeed not a big problem. But I was still a little curious. There are so many gentlemen in the palace, why do they think of Bai Lin Wade as their teacher? Because in the past 2 days the tea house was full of stories about Lin Wade and Chen Guangdi. They felt that Lin Wade was so beautiful. The most important thing is that he likes to take his disciples out to travel in the mountains and rivers and teach on site. Who really wants to be Confucius and Chen Guangdi disciple is second, so Mao put all his energy into becoming Lin Wade's disciple. Chi Heiran was flustered for a moment, and asked blankly, so is he the number 2 of Confucius, or the number 2 of his disciples? Mu Yangling looked at him contemptuously, can your son be like Confucius? You have to put a lot of gold on your face to say such a thing. Chi Heiran jumped up and shouted, then Lin Wade can't be the second Confucius. Why is it not shameful to say this reason? Let me tell you, Mu Yangling, our family has no reputation among scholars, don't you, let them ruin their reputation even more. Mu Yangling said calmly, what are you afraid of? Children say nothing, and it is always good for a few children to have ideals. They are just apprentices. If they succeed, they will be happy, and if they fail, it is also predictable. Chi Heiran glared at Mu Yangling, then I just want to ask you, who else knows the reason for this apprenticeship? Mu Yangling looked at him, pointed at himself, and said, there are also guards following them, don't worry, their mouths are tight, and they can't lose face. Chi Heiran was relieved, he sat back on the chair again, and sighed, forget it, let them go as long as he doesn't lose face, he can do whatever he wants. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1195. No one stopped this time, and the 3 children met Lin Wade smoothly. There was a lot of noise about Mu Bowen blocking the 3 children from entering the academy that day, and there were students watching, so Lin Wade has more or less heard some rumors these days. Because of Mu Yangling's visit, Lin Wade and Chen Guangdi were on the cusp of the storm, so he kept a low profile during this time, and even if he heard such rumors, he pretended not to have heard them. He thought that since there were people blocking him that day, there should be people blocking him later. Sure enough, the wind and sea were calm for 5 consecutive days, and the 3 children really didn't break out of the waves, but who would have expected that the 3 children would reappear 5 days later, passing through the gate of the academy unimpeded, and standing directly in front of him. In fact, today is also the holiday of Songshan Academy, but who asked him to be a hard-working teacher, who came early in the morning at the invitation of the students to have extra classes with everyone, because the weather was fine and the spring breeze made people feel comfortable, and when he was happy, he opened the teaching place. Change it to the garden, so that more students who want to listen to the lecture can hear the lecture. Then 3 suspicious people mixed in with his students. Lin Wade really wanted to poke his eyes, because he had only met Chi Heiran not long ago, and the twins appeared with that face on their faces, and anyone who wasn't blind could guess their identities. Lin Wade thought, well, almost as soon as the 3 children appeared, everyone's eyes fell on them. There is no way, the information that has been circulated secretly these days makes them particularly sensitive to the twins, and the faces of the tiger head and the little lion are too recognizable, and Xiaoan also looks very much like his father, King An. Such a combination appears to be a fool can guess who they are. Therefore, the students who were asking questions carried forward the good virtue of humility and mutual assistance, and expressed that they would give up the opportunity to ask questions that they had finally won to the youngest person present. So, everyone's eyes were on the tiger head and the little lion in unison, and whispered, which of these 2 is younger? Who knows but themselves? Hutu expressed his gratitude to that good student, and was about to go out with his head held high, but Zioan and Zyashi grabbed him quickly. Hutio reacted immediately, stopped and turned to stare innocently at the cub. The little lion took a step forward without looking sideways, raised his head to meet Lin Wide's eyes, and said seriously, "Mr. Lin, the student has a question." "Everyone, don't think we didn't see it, you are not the youngest one at all, the one next to you who looks exactly like you is." The actual age is younger than the tiger's head, but the little lion who has always been the elder ignored everyone's gaze and continued, "I don't know what Mr. Lin's criteria are for accepting apprentices. Do you think the three of us are suitable?" Seeing that he showed no fear under everyone's gaze, everyone couldn't help cheering in their hearts. Even Lin Wide secretly praised in his heart, not everyone can be so calm under the gaze of others, let alone ask him to comment on his apprenticeship in front of so many people. Because he has a higher chance of not accepting it, and he will be ashamed at that time. However, these three children are very frank and open-minded, which is worthy of Lin Wide's praise. This year is not the time for Lin Wide to accept apprentices, and the three of them do not meet his requirements. Although he is also very tempted, he is more willing to leave the opportunity to the poor, so he can only regretfully refuse. "The three of you are very happy, all right, but this year is not the time for me to accept apprentices. The three young masters are so smart and intelligent, and there are many people who are willing to accept you as apprentices." Although Xiaoan and Xiaoshi were a little disappointed, this result was already expected, so it was not difficult to accept. Both of them heard the refusal in Lin Wide's words, only Huda didn't hear it, and when he was about to ask, Xiaoan held his hand. Years of tacit understanding made Huda shut his mouth and remain silent. The actions of the two were very secretive, and no one noticed. Seeing the disappointment on the faces of the three of them, Lin Wide smiled and said, "But if you have any questions, you can ask me, as long as I know everything." Huda's eyes lit up when he heard the words, and asked, "Then can I ask under the big tree?" Xiaoan and Little Lion resisted the urge to hold their foreheads, looked at Lin Wide seriously, and tried their best to say that this is a very normal problem, really. Lin Wide couldn't quite understand this sentence, so he could only understand it literally and said, "It's fine if it doesn't rain." Huda said goodbye to Xiaoan and Xiao Shiza contentedly. "This is the end. Don't continue to pester me. The students think these three are too easy to kill, don't they?" Lin Wide nodded in his heart again, feeling that the temperament and mentality of these three people are all good. When there were fewer people on the road, Huda asked suspiciously, "Why don't you let me ask questions? Are you going to ask him if he would accept us as disciples next year?" the little lion asked. Huda nodded, "This year is not the year for him to accept disciples, but next year will be." "Then I can answer you," Xiaoan said, "No. The reason is that he has already recruited enough disciples." Huda's eyes widened, and the little lion explained to him, "What he said just now has completely rejected us, and he can always find a reason to reject us." "Why?" Huda asked curiously, "is it because we are not good enough?" "Maybe," the little lion said indifferently, "every gentleman has different standards for accepting apprentices. Do you have to ask Lin Wide to be your teacher? If so, then we will go back and ask about the standards, and work hard towards that goal, yes." Xiaoan said, "I don't think it's because we are not good enough, but because of our identities. But no matter what the reason is, Hudu, do you have to worship him as a teacher? If it must be Lin Wide, they will always work hard." Hutio thought about it seriously, then shook his head, "It's not that he is the only one, but it's a pity. I still want to go on a study tour with my husband, and we will serve him like Confucius disciples, and maybe we can leave a good story." Xiaoan and Xiaoshi looked at each other helplessly. Huda seems to like role-playing a lot recently. The news of the three children's apprenticeship at Songshan Academy quickly spread, and the husband who taught them was a little disappointed, while Qi Xiaoyuan wondered if the teachers in the palace were not good enough, so that the three children wanted to run away. Thus, the three children who had happily strolled for half a street were found by the guards and found Suanjin Palace. The three of them were a little unhappy, and when they saw Chi Ziyuan, they complained, "Uncle Huang, it's so hard for us to have a vacation, what can't we talk about the day after tomorrow?" Chi Ziyuan, who was about to open his mouth, was silent for a moment, and then called someone over and asked, "Why do you want to worship Lin Wide as your teacher?" Xiaoan and Little Lion quickly winked at Hutu. This kind of reason can be told to the fourth aunt, mother, but not to Uncle Huang. Seeing their movements, Chi Ziyuan immediately ordered the two of them to say, "Xiaoan, Uncle Huang heard that you learned how to make tea with your father? It happens that Uncle Huang has a new Dahongbao here, so go and make a cup." Little Lion, "Uncle Huang, I left a book in the study room during my lunch break and couldn't find it, so you follow Eunuch Wan to help me find it." "Come on, Hutu, let me talk to you." The three brothers looked at each other, and they all moved towards their respective goals with some solemnity. Uncle Huang is in the same group as the gentleman in the study, and he doesn't know how to deal with them afterwards. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1196. The Tao is 1 foot tall and the devil is 10 feet tall, not to mention that Hutu's Taoism is not high, so Chi Ziyuan made a fool of himself within a few words. He looked helplessly at his nephew who looked exactly like his younger brother, trying to recall his 10-year-old younger brother. Heiran was not so childish back then. 10-year-old Heiran is like a half hedgehog, pointing his finger at where to hit. His biggest hobby every day is skipping class to make his father unhappy. However, the living environment is different, and the thinking and doing are naturally different. Chi Ziyuan stroked Hutu's head and thought, although the children's behavior is a bit childish, there is nothing wrong with it, it's better than them fighting with a dude like a dog. Chi Ziyuan absolutely does not admit that he has bad water in his heart. When Xiaoan and Little Lion came back with a cup of tea and a book, they knew something was wrong when they saw Hutu sitting on a chair with his head downcast. They looked at the tiger's head with hatred, and gave tea and books to the emperor in a grieved manner. Chi Ziyuan said with a smile, "Okay, you guys go out to play, it's rare to take a rest, it's good to go shopping around." Xiaoan and Little Lion pulled the tiger's head and turned around and left, snorting coldly in their hearts, "You also know that it's rare to take a rest, so you brought us into the palace, don't you know how long it takes to enter the palace? Their day's work." On the way out of the palace, Hutiou was very sorry, "I wanted to keep my mouth shut, but Uncle Huang said that if I didn't speak, I would be fined for a month, so I could only talk to him nonsense, but he was still dazzled by him." "It's not your fault, adults hate it so much," the Little Lion comforted his younger brother, but then said, "But you have to learn other ways to deal with it." "That's right, keeping your mouth shut works for the husband, but it doesn't work for Uncle Huang." Xiaoan thought hard, "But it doesn't matter, we can always come up with a good way." "Then do you think Uncle Huang will do bad things to us behind our backs?" Hutiou said worriedly, looking at Uncle's reaction. "It seems that it is not a good thing to ask Lin Wide to be your husband. Uncle Huang just let us go like this." Seeing that his whole face was wrinkled, Xiaoan and Little Lion couldn't bear to blame him anymore, and comforted him, "It's okay, the soldiers will come and cover him with water and earth." Then when they went back to study in the study, the three children who were full of vigilance welcomed the smiling gentleman. The gentleman who taught them Chinese studies smiled and pointed to the sky outside and said, "The weather is fine today, how about we go to the garden to give lectures?" The children were taken aback for a moment, then cheered. Hutu was even more excited and said to Xiaoan and the Little Lion, "It turns out that Uncle Huang didn't scold us, but let the gentleman adjust. Uncle Huang is really kind to us." Xiaoan and Xiaoshi still had doubts in their hearts, but after thinking about it carefully, they felt that this matter could not be faked, so they were relieved. To go to class in the garden, you first need a piece of grass where you can place desks and desks. There are not many other places in the palace. There are plenty of such open spaces, and the scenery is not bad. Secondly, the desk should be moved to the grass. Mu Yangling suggested early on that children should look like students when they go to the study room. Therefore, although there are eunuchs serving in the study room, there are very few eunuchs, so few that they are only responsible for cleaning the house and providing tea between classes. None of the servants and eunuchs who take care of the children are allowed to enter the upper study, and the prince is the same. So even the crown prince would grind ink and lay paper by himself, and no one would do it for him. Since they wanted to move things to the grass, they had to do it by themselves without servants, so as the oldest Xiaoan, the tiger-headed lion and the second prince, they not only had to move their own, but also took care of the weak third and fourth princes. But it's also simple, Xiaoan and Qi Wendy are not strong, but Tigerhead and Little Lion are not weak. They went back and forth twice, not only moved the 3 princes and 4 princes, but also gave Xiaoan and Qi Wendy a helping hand. So when everyone arranged their seats, the problem came: Mr. S desk, books, pens and inks, rulers and other things hadn't arrived yet. Huda looked left and right, and asked, "Why isn't your husband here?" The Little Lion and Qi Wensu were equally confused, not to mention the 3rd and 4th princes who had just been enlightened. A group of children sat on the grass and looked at each other. It was Xiaoan who lowered his head and pondered for a moment, and finally sighed, "So that's what Uncle Huang meant." He got up helplessly, and said to the group of little radish heads, "Teacher and father, the disciples have to do their best, and the master has not sat down. How dare we sit down? Let's go, come with me to invite the master." Then he said emphatically to the tiger head and the little lion, "I will entrust the things of the sir to you." Xiaoan led a group of young people back to the study room, and the nervous gentleman who was sitting on the chair heaved a sigh of relief when he saw it. Fortunately, he didn't embarrass him. Although there is a smart disciple who will always make trouble with himself and make himself helpless, it is also beneficial. He can always guess what the master is thinking, can't he? Xiaoan led a group of children and respectfully asked Mr. to move. Mr. coughed reservedly, got up, and walked away. Xiaoan looked at Tiger Head and Little Lion, and the two immediately went to carry the husband's desk and seat, while Xiaoan and the rest carried books, pens, and ink and other things followed. The other gentlemen who were waiting for the lecture in the side hall stood in front of the window and watched, stroked their beards with satisfaction and sighed, "Although you are naughty, you respect your teacher." It is really rare for a child in the royal family to do this. This class of Chinese studies was taught outside, and the class ended after the sun was up. Hutu, Little Lion, and others worked tirelessly to bring the things back. The gentlemen seem to have gotten the hang of it. Since then, whenever the weather is good, they like to go outside to attend classes. The sun is big. It doesn't matter, let's find a big shade tree and teach under it. Thirsty and no tea? It doesn't matter, what are so many disciples used for? Naturally, it was used to serve the gentlemen. From the youngest and to the youngest 4th prince, each of them served tea to the gentleman, which was unthinkable in the previous study room. Even the most courteous crown prince has never served them tea. If there is no water in the teacup, either the eunuchs add it or the gentlemen do it themselves. The children are patronizing and mischievous, and the gentlemen are full of thoughts on how to prevent classroom accidents. Where do you still care about these etiquettes? So this is really an unprecedented first. Hanlin, who came to give lectures, no longer has a straight face every day, but is full of smiles. It is not a loss for the princes to serve him as teachers. If the children are naughty, let them be naughty, they will admit it. The gentlemen are gentle. Although the children are more lively, they are also more sensible. At least Hutu won't take the 3rd prince and the 4th prince to throw bugs into the gentleman's shoe secretly. Qi Ziyuan, who wanted to use this to torment the children, did not expect such an effect. He opened his mouth wide for a moment, and asked Eunuch Wan, "How is this effect achieved?" Eunuch Wan bowed and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, you acted properly, so that you and the children can respect the teacher even more. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1197. Recently, the officials in the Imperial Academy who are qualified to give lectures in the study are all in a good mood, so when they were told that their wife was going to apply for the editorship of Wengzhou News, they were only slightly depressed. Following the publication of Wengzhou newspaper's various rules, the Times also consolidated the 4 newspapers under its name. After naming them and setting the rules, it began to solicit articles and recruit staff from all over the country. A group of men were embarrassed to only stare at the announcement in the Wengzhou newspaper, so they stared at the announcement in the Times. Lin White is really capable. He managed to organize the newspapers after only 8 days in office. He named the 4 newspapers one by one. Various government affairs, peripheral diplomatic relations are also covered, and any current affairs can be published. The 3 newly added newspapers are respectively defined as Daki Kuoxia Journal, Daki Geography and Customs Newspaper and Daki Children's Newspaper according to the content defined by Mu Yangling. According to the regulations of the Times, officials are not allowed to hold any position in the newspaper, so although the idle editors of the Imperial Academy would like to be guest editors to enjoy themselves, they will not accept them. But it doesn't matter, although they can't hold office, their articles can appear in what? If you can pass the Jinshi examination and enter the Imperial Academy, will your writing skills be poor? From the Times to the National Science Journal to the Geography and Customs newspaper, everyone is good at everything, even the children's newspaper. They can't sell it, but they have sons and grandsons. Even if sons and grandsons can't do it, they still have students. Especially the few gentlemen in the study room, their students have a natural advantage. Who owns the Times? His student's mother opened it. Therefore, the homework assigned by the gentleman during the rest is to write a manuscript for Daki Children's Newspaper, which must be accepted by Children's Newspaper. Of course, since the 3rd and 4th princes are still learning big characters, they may not be included. But none of the remaining 4 could escape. If they are not allowed to enter the newspaper office, they will flood the newspaper office with manuscripts, not only their own, but also those of their students. As a result, the 4 children were distressed. Qi Wensu held his face and asked, "How should I write the manuscript for children's news?" Xiaoan and the twins shook their heads together. They never wrote it, how did they know? But they were not worried at all. Hudu said confidently, "Go home and ask my mother to find out." Qi Wensu's eyes lit up, and he immediately said, "Then I will leave the palace too, and I will stay at your house tonight." The 3rd and 4th princes, who were silently writing, immediately put down their pens, ran over and said, "We're going to." Qi Wensu sternly said, "No, you don't need to write manuscripts. What are you going to do?" "Humph, don't think that we don't know that you want to run out of the palace to play. We don't care. If you don't bring us with you, we will tell father that we like to play with you the most, but if you don't bring us to play, we will definitely cry until the house falls down." Hudu immediately said, "If you can cry the Great Wall down, even if you ask to go out of the palace every day to play with Uncle Huang, you will agree." The 3rd prince was taken aback, and then asked, "The Great Wall? It's so far there, if I want to cry, I have to run to the bottom of the Great Wall." Who was stunned for a moment, then turned to ask the 3 friends, why didn't they hear that I was mocking them? It's not fun at all. Xiaoan couldn't stop it in time, and as soon as Hudu said this, the 3rd and 4th princes immediately knew that they had been tricked. They simply closed their eyes and cried out with a wow. Hu Tiaoyu was so frightened that he almost fell off the chair. The 2 children were crying so hard, even though there were not many servants in the study room, the eunuchs rushed in as quickly as possible, but the 2 princes just closed their eyes and cried. How could they listen to everyone's comfort? So, a group of children were packed and sent to Cunning Palace for evaluation, but the upper study room was outside the scope of the harem, and it took a long way to go to Cunning Palace, which was not as close as the emperor's imperial study room. So after walking for a while, the emperor who heard the movement sent Unicorn to pick him up. The 6 children stood in a row, the 3rd and 4th princes were still sobbing, they stared at the father with wet eyes, while the other 4 lowered their heads in frustration. Chi Xiuyuan was busy with state affairs, and suddenly became impatient looking at the 6 children below. Fortunately, he only has 6 sons, if there are more, the palace will be turned upside down. Sure enough, Aling was right, having too many children is a burden. Chi Xiuyuan ignored the 2 sons who were still sobbing, pointed at Hudu and asked, "Hudu, what are you talking about?" Hudu lowered his head and took a step forward, apologetically saying, "I'm sorry, it's all my fault, I shouldn't let them cry on the Great Wall." "Wait a minute," Chi Xiuyuan raised his forehead and asked Xiaoan, "You are studying Zozhuan recently? I remember that your courses are not so fast." Xiaoan glanced at the dazed Hudu, and replied, "Sir, I didn't talk about Zozhuan. Brother Prince and Brother Xiaoxiang went to Shangzi, visited the Great Wall, drew a picture and sent it to us, and my 4th aunt gave it to us. I have told a lot of stories about the Great Wall, but the story of Meng Jianglu crying over the Great Wall was the first one to tell." Chi Xiuyuan thought of the paintings that were treasured in his study room, which he co-authored were still mass-produced. He took a deep breath, looked at the tiger's head, and asked, "Why do you want them to cry on the Great Wall? What did I do to make people complain?" Meng Jianglu cried on the Great Wall because of the tyranny of Qin Shi Huang, and her husband's bones did not exist, implying that the tyranny killed people. Scholars all over the world understand this truth, but Tigerhead is obviously not one of them. He scratched his head and said, "They said they were going to cry the house down. I think they can cry the house down, so it must be can cry the Great Wall down." Chi Xiuyuan sighed, then turned to Xiaoan again, "Could it be that your 4th aunt didn't tell him the moral of the story when she told it?" Xiaoan frowned, and said, "4th aunt asked us to think for ourselves, why Meng Jianglu cried down the Great Wall, and why this incident was recorded in Zozhuan and spread widely. Huda doesn't seem to have figured it out yet." Huda pouted angrily, and Chi Xiuyuan shouted angrily, "Uncle Huang, just ask me if you ask me, and Brother Xiaoan if you don't ask me a question. I'm not a fool, I can answer these questions for you of." Chi Xiuyuan touched his head with pity and said, "Of course I know you can answer, but Uncle Huang has limited time. I'm afraid that today will be over after I figure out your answer and get things straightened out, so you should be a little bit aggrieved. Let me ask Xiaoan if they are all right. Then you can ask Xiaoan, why do you still have to ask me? Ask him." Chi Xiuyuan praised him and said, "Because you are the most honest among the children, and they always like to avoid the important and ignore the less important. Although it is not enough to lie, you can always make me ignore the most important things." Hudu has already learned to be good. He thinks that the word sincerity is not a good word in Uncle Wang's mouth. Isn't this calling him stupid in disguise? So he puffed up his cheeks and looked at Uncle Huang. The little lion couldn't see Uncle Huang bullying Hudu like this, but Hudu was his younger brother, and he said he would protect him. So the little lion turned around and asked the 3rd and 4th princes who had stopped crying, "Why do you say you want to cry and collapse the house? Are you so powerful?" The 3rd prince and the 4th prince sniffed, and said aggrievedly, "Father said it. He said that if we cry again, the house will collapse. Every time we cry, Father will agree to our request, so it's best to take us out of the palace too, or we'll tear down the house." The 4 older children directly ignored the last words of the 2 children, and looked at Chi Xiuyuan in unison, their eyes were full of condemnation. Xiaoan even touched the heads of the 3rd prince and the 4th prince and sighed, "You are really sincere." Chi Xiuyuan miraculously felt that 2 arrows had been shot in his heart. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1198. Chi Xiaoyuan was abused by the children, and he was in no mood to continue playing with them. After learning the whole story from Hutu, he made a quick decision: the second child can go to your fourth uncle's house for 2 days, and the third child and keep it for the fourth child, and let me write 200 big characters each when I go back. Who taught you that you can achieve your wish just by crying? The third and fourth princes did not expect that not only would they not be able to go out with them, but they would also be punished. Chi Xiaoyuan stared at them with a condensed face and said, "Whoever dares to cry, I will punish him to write another 500 big characters. No meat is allowed." The tiger head and the little lion immediately covered the mouths of the two cousins and winked at them. Thinking of the content of the additional punishment, the two children could only hold back their tears. It wasn't until they left the imperial study room that Tiger Head and Little Lion let go of their mouths, and comforted them. "It's just a fine of 200 sheets of big characters, and you can finish it with a little effort. Unlike us, if we dare to cry and play tricks and ask for something, my father will definitely beat us up, not only punish us for writing big characters, but also punish us not to ride horses, and be laughed at as little girls." The second prince also came over to apologize to the two younger brothers. "When I come back, I will definitely bring you something fun, but don't cry easily in the future." The three friends worked together and finally coaxed the two little kids away. The tiger head and the little lion wiped the sweat from their foreheads and sighed, "My mother is really hard." Xiaoan said with his hands behind his back, "Wen Qian and Wen Mi are used to this by Uncle Huang. He used to think that Wen Qian and Wen Mi were annoying when they cried, so he tried his best to fulfill their wishes, which made them feel that crying can make them happy, get what they want, so every time it doesn't go your way, you start crying." The tiger head and the little lion stared wide-eyed and asked, "How do you know?" "Guess," Xiaoan said with a sideways glance at them. "Every time you heard what Wen Qian and the others said just now, it was Uncle Huang who said that if they cried again, the house would collapse, so in order to prevent the house from collapsing, it is natural to satisfy their wishes and prevent them from going any further. Keep crying. Of course, there may be reasons for their mother and concubine." Master Xiaoan said generally, "Anyway, now I understand why when we were young, whenever we cried unreasonably, fourth aunt beat us or surrounded us in a circle and let us cry." The tiger head and the little lion stared again. "Why don't I remember these things?" In the hearts of the two of them, they have always been very well behaved and obedient. "Okay." Xiaoan looked at the two of them with contempt, and walked away with her head held high. Hutu and the little lion hurriedly pulled the thoughtful Wen Su and chased after him. The children seldom avoid people when they talk, so Chi Xiaoyuan naturally knew what they said very quickly. Realizing that he was inferior to a child in education, Chi Xiaoyuan couldn't help but feel ashamed. He thought about it seriously, and finally left the political affairs and ran back to the harem to find two children who were suffering physically and mentally for in-depth education. The four children returned to the palace together, told Mu Yangling about their homework this time, looked at her eagerly and asked, "What do you think we should write?" Mu Yangling blinked, and looked at the children for a while before saying, "Well, didn't your husband give you directions?" The four children shook their heads in unison. "Then what do you want to write?" The four children looked at each other and shook their heads in the same way. They have never written this kind of manuscript, so how would they know what to write? Mu Yangling rubbed his chin and said, "You can write about your happiness, troubles, and your ideals, and you can even write about things that touch you deeply." Xiaoan was thoughtful, but the other three were still confused. Mu Yangling said, "Why don't you ask Xiaoan's father before he comes back? He has the best literary talents, so he should have some suggestions." So the four children moved to Anjun Palace. When Xiaofu heard the news and came running with the little leopard orb, the brothers had disappeared, and Xiaofu immediately pouted in grievance, "Brother forgot about me." Mu Yangling was embarrassed, and hurriedly hugged him into his arms and said, "Your elder brother has not forgotten you. It is the fourth aunt who is going to your house for dinner today, and will take you there later." Xiaofu didn't shed any tears, and said happily again, "Then fourth aunt, hurry up, my brothers and sisters and I are going to get toys." Okay. After Mu Yangling and the others left, he said to Li Shun, "Let Xiaoting inform the prince that we have all gone to the prince's mansion in Anjun, and tell him to go directly to the prince's mansion for dinner after leaving the yamen." Xiaoan, who jumped off the carriage, wailed suddenly, startling everyone, and the little lion rushed over and asked, "What's the matter, what's the matter? I forgot about my brother, he's still at your house now." The little lion and tiger head were also dumbfounded. Xiao Fu loves to play with little leopard and Beza the most, and Xiao Xia is also relieved to put his son in Prince Rong's mansion. The first thing Xiaoan does when he comes back from school every day is to pick up his younger brother at the prince's mansion, and then go back to the prince's mansion. Today he is only thinking about the manuscript "I forgot about my brother" at once. Xiaoan climbed back into the carriage again, and said, "I'll pick up my brother first, and you guys go to my little study and wait for me first." The tiger head and the little lion agreed, and pulled Qi Wensu away first. The distance between the prince's mansion and the prince's mansion is not far, and it only takes a quarter of an hour to take a carriage, but this is a long time for the anxious Xiaoan. He raised the curtain and looked at the prince's mansion under construction, saying, "When will we move into our new home? Ah." Xinjun Wangfu and prince's mansion are on the opposite side, and there is even a place where they are connected. There is no need for a carriage, just open the door and rush over. Mu Yangling laughed when he saw Xiaoan rushing back again, touched his head and said, "I was just about to take your brother there, but you just happened to be here, so I can't forget your brother in the future." Xiaoan lowered her head in shame. "Got it?" Xiaofu and Little Leopard came over with a bunch of toys in their arms. Seeing that his brother was there, he widened his eyes and asked, "Brother, why are you here? I'll take you home." Xiaofu snorted proudly, "I'm not a child anymore. My fourth aunt will take me home, so I don't want you to come here to pick me up." Mu Yangling couldn't help but lament the power of Fan Zijian's genes. This child has spent the longest time with her, but why is his temper becoming more and more like his father's? Xiaoan didn't mind his younger brother's arrogance, so he picked him up and stuffed him into the carriage, saying, "Let's go, I'm in a hurry." Little Leopard and Beizu immediately opened their hands to get into the carriage, and Mu Yangling pushed one of them into the carriage. Xiao Xia had already received the news, and was waiting for them in front of the Chihuahua gate. When she saw Mu Yangling, she smiled and said, "I always go there for dinner. It's not a festival, so it's rare for your family to come here for dinner. If you like, I'll take them here every day for dinner. That's a good relationship, lest I always feel that the house is deserted, not as lively as yours." The two walked towards the backyard while talking, and Xiaoan left them and ran to the small study. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1199. Chi Heiran just came out of the small building from the Ministry of War, and led the horse over and said, "Master, Madam Cai came to the small pavilion to send a message that she will go to the county palace for dinner tonight." Chi Heiran was surprised. "Is there any happy event in the county palace?" Xialo explained the reason, and Chi Heiran curled his lips and said, "Isn't it just that I forgot to pick up my younger brother? Tell Xiaofu the truth, why bother to cover it up and run over for dinner?" He didn't know how Aling judged the seriousness of the matter. Anyway, she didn't care about the serious things in his eyes, and let the children develop freely. The things he thought were trivial and insignificant, she was like a big enemy generally. Not only Chi Heiran can't understand Mu Yangling's thoughts, but Fan Zijian can't either. He thinks it's because Xiaoan forgot to pick up Xiaofu, and he left him in the wilderness, so he needs to care for Xiaofu's heart so nervously. However, When Chi Heiran couldn't understand, he chose to accommodate. Fan Zijian obviously didn't have this kind of feeling, but thinking of Chi Heiran who was caught in the middle, he decided not to discuss this matter further with Mu Yangling. Anyway, she was not his wife. No need. Fan Zijian, who also got the news, came out of the door of the household department and saw Chi Heiran who was looking around, leaning on his horse in boredom. He stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder and said, "Let's go." The cousins rode back together, and it was time for everyone to buy vegetables and close the stalls, and the street was extremely lively. Chi Heiran reined in his horse when he passed by the newspaper office, pointed at some beggars on the street who were curled up and hiding in the dark with his whip, and said, "Zijin, if one day there are no beggars on the street, the Chi can really be old. The real prosperity is when there is something to support, the young are taught, and the sick are healed." Fan Zijian squeezed the rein tightly in his hand, and asked, "You deliberately spared 2 streets just to tell me this?" Chi Heiran looked at the setting sun in the sky, and said, "A Ling once joked with several children that they were the morning Sunday. I used to laugh at her for making random metaphors, but now I think it is very appropriate. If the children are the morning sun, then we are at noon, illuminating the whole of Daki with scorching heat, but one day we will become the sunset, and then they will be the sun at noon, and they will replace us and illuminate the whole of Daki. Zijin, we only play a very small role in the prosperity of Daki, because we are getting old, and this burden will eventually be handed over to the children. Therefore, we should not neglect children's education like this. Cultivating a group of good heirs is no less important than the government affairs we are currently handling." Fan Zijian's eyes were full of doubts. "So?" Chi Heiran coughed lightly, "So when you go back later, you can't just teach them writing skills, but also teach them how to take on their responsibilities. They are different from ordinary children. They are princes, my sons, yours. Son, in the future, I will assist Xiaobao, the person who holds the most important positions." Fan Zijian asked, "Aling asked you to tell me this?" Chi Heiran said proudly, "Can her head think of this? This is what I mean." Chi Heiran rode his horse towards the county palace, and said to him, "Have you forgotten, this is our dream, a dream many years ago." Fan Zijian fell silent. "That's right. Mu Yangling's ideal is to plant excellent high-yield and high-quality seeds so that there will be no famine in troubled times. It is the ideal of the 3 brothers to take care of the old, teach the young, and heal the sick. You also know that Aling and I are not very good at reading. We didn't teach the children much when they were young. We couldn't teach them too much when they were older. Little Treasure was taught by Brother Huang himself. Little Bear will take my place in the future. I can teach him, but for the remaining few, even they themselves don't know what they are going to do in the future, and they have constant questions every day, and the knowledge of me and Aling is a bit narrow compared to them." Chi Heiran said, "Your knowledge is good, but I always feel that your education is wrong. Every time I see you teach them something, I am frightened. Zijin, they are not us. They have lived happily since childhood, and we support them. We were so scheming when we were kids." Fan Zijin sneered and said, "Which of those people in the court is easy to get along with? I don't teach them to plot tricks, and they will suffer in the future." Chi Heiran said, "I always think that conspiracy is not as good as Yangmu. Even if someone plots against them, as long as they stand upright, wise enough, and help each other, they can fight back openly. Zijin, the whole Daki is not just we can rely on our children, they can only be regarded as the leading wolves at most. If Daki wants to prosper, we need many, many children to follow them. It is difficult to convince people with tricks." Chi Heiran can be regarded as very sincere to Fan Zijin. Fan Zijin may scoff at what others say, but Chi Heiran can more or less listen to what he says. Chi Heiran was relieved when he saw him pondering. Fan Zijin was smart. As long as he was willing to think about it, the matter would be half the success. If he and Mu Yangling were not capable enough, he would not have said this to Fan Zijan. The children have been staying with him and Aling for a longer time, and most of the problems are dealt with by the couple. For the first time ever, Aling pushed the children to Fan Zijan before he went back, and Chi Heiran couldn't answer the children's questions from Xialo. As for how to write the manuscript for the children's newspaper, he was only barely satisfied with his own official documents, let alone such things that he had never heard of. Although Aling made the things, Aling's articles are not as good as his, let alone guide the children. If she hadn't really run out of ideas, she wouldn't have pushed the children to Zijan. And the only intellectual and cultural pass of the two is Zijan. Chi Heiran thought about it for a long time before he came up with this rhetoric. He planned to take Aling out to travel around the mountains and rivers in 10 years. This burden must be handed over to the children. If the children are not taught well, it will be difficult for him. Don't worry when you go out with Aling. Only when Dachi gets better and better can he go out with Aling more at ease. And several children are getting more and more difficult to teach, especially Xiaoan. That kid is too smart, and he has the most problems every time, even teaching the tiger head and the little lion. He and Aling have limited ink in their stomachs. So let's bring Zijan over and let everyone teach together. But Zijan's teaching principles are too different from theirs, and he has to minimize this difference as much as possible before cooperating, otherwise the adults will compete with each other, and the brats will win in the end. Xiaoan and the others didn't know that the adults were about to reach a united front, and they were excitedly discussing the children's newspaper in the small study. Hutu heard that as long as his articles could be published in the children's newspaper, he would be famous all over the world, and his enthusiasm was boundless for a while. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1200. Before entering the small study, Fan Zijan glanced back at Chi Heiran. In the end he had no choice but to compromise. He was right. Their goal is to let the children build Daki better, not to be the ministers who guard against the court. Only the farther they look, the longer they can go. Fan Zijan was born as a Jinchi and has always been smart. It can be said that he is no worse than those Hanlin bachelors who teach. He doesn't have the worries of the gentleman, and he can teach the children as he wants. His eyes widened first, and then his guidance became more incisive. Isn't Heiran just wanting to train more and more talents for Daki? In fact, Xiaobao and Xiaoxiang have been doing this kind of thing all the time. Just because of their limited strength, there are only about 20 schools in Baoxiang Academy now, but wouldn't it be enough if more people come to run free schools? It is suspected of coercion if they propose this matter or if it is proposed by the court, but if the children come to mention it, there will be no sense of disobedience. But take your time, don't rush. When Fan Zijan found a few children, the first thing he said was, "You guys have been discussing for a long time, who has an idea?" The tiger-headed little lion and Chi Wensu scrambled to express their opinions, but Xiaoan gave his father a strange look, thinking that his father was so obedient today that he would be the first to ask their opinions. Fan Zijan knew what his son was thinking at a glance, patted his little head and said, "Say it first." Xiaoan tilted her head and said, "And as I said that the most important thing for a child is to grow up happily, so we should write more happy things." Fan Zijan snorted, "How many parents in this world are capable of making their children grow up happily? Are you writing this to make everyone jealous of you?" Xiaoan choked, but Hutu didn't seem to understand the second uncle's sarcasm, and raised his hands and shouted, "I love hunting on horseback the most, so I want to write about hunting on horseback." Fan Zijan nodded approvingly, "That's right. Riding and archery occupies a large proportion among the 6 arts. Nowadays, both civil and martial arts are emphasized in the Great Qi. It is indeed necessary to greatly promote riding and archery. After you finish writing, hand it over to me, and I will correct it for you and then hand it over to Sir." Hutio suddenly became elated. He was the first person to pass the outline. The little lion also immediately said, then I'll write about our going to the farm, it's also very fun. Fan Zijan patted his head and said, that's not bad. Every time you go to the farm, don't you always have endless questions? Why don't you organize them and write them down to see what other children have answers? The little lion thought about it. Chi Wensu also wanted to raise his hand to express, but Xiaoan pressed down and said angrily, Daddy, you discriminate against me, why can Tiger Head and Little Lion write happy things, but I can't? You are an older brother and you can't give in to your younger brother? They wrote happy things, so you should write some sad things. Chi Wensu immediately fell silent, looked around, and Xiaoan hummed, humph, then I'll write that you favor one thing than another, which makes me very sad. Fan Zijan couldn't wish for it, and let the world see how good he is to Chi Heiran's son. He stroked his son's head and said, okay, just write like this. Xiaoan suddenly pouted. Chi Wensu scratched his head and said, then what sad things should I write? Fan Zijan asked him, what are you sad about? Chi Wensu lowered his head and said in a low voice, isn't it true that my mother and concubine are not very kind to me? The son does not say anything about the mother's faults. If Wendy really writes like this, I am afraid that no one will agree with it except children of the same age, and he will be criticized. Fan Zijan said with a serious face, this is too sensitive to be published in the newspaper. Seeing that Wensu's eyes were red, he changed the subject and asked, do you really want to write this? Chi Wensu asked blankly, didn't you ask me to write sad things? Fan Zijan touched his head and said, son, you are too sincere. Chi Wensu burst into tears, looked at him accusingly and said, second uncle, how can you scold me? Fan Zijan turned to look at the three beside him blankly and asked, does Shishan always praise you? Huda jumped out first and said, sincerity is stupid, you are calling Wensu stupid. Fan Zijan almost went crazy, who taught you all this? Sincerity is obviously a good word. He turned his head to coax Chi Wensu and said, okay, what did you want to write before? I forgot. Fan Zijan decided to take the children out for a walk tomorrow, to see the world, and let them see what is sad and what is joy. Hudu asked in surprise, second uncle, don't you want to go to court tomorrow? Fan Zijan coughed lightly, and said, second uncle will rest tomorrow, that's enough, you guys hurry up and tidy up and have dinner. The children started discussing as soon as they came out of the study. Fan Zijan heard Huda say in a very envious tone, brother Xiaoan, your father is so kind, he can always take a rest, if only my father had so many vacations, he will definitely take us for a ride. Then the little lion's hateful voice sounded, little brother, you are so stupid. Second uncle and father are officials in the same dynasty, and the time for rest and bathing is the same. The reason why second uncle doesn't have to go to court is because he is absent from work. Huda looked at Xiaoan in astonishment, brother Xiaoan is real. Fan Zijan heard his son humming softly, I've been used to it for a long time. My father often misses work, but he also often works overtime. Hudu asked hesitantly, does Uncle Huang not care? Fan Zijan heard Hudu excitedly say later, then we'll also skip class and go out to play, and we'll make up for it later. Fan Zijan gritted his teeth, feeling that these children really needed to be cleaned up. Chi Heiran also gritted his teeth, feeling that it was really a mistake to let Zijan teach the child, this person doesn't even know how to teach by example. Because Fan Zijan was going to take the children out the next day, only Chi Heiran and his wife went home with the twins at night, and the other children decided to stay in the county palace. Chi Heiran said worriedly, how many children can Zijan really teach? This is the first time he took a few children out alone. Mu Yangling was very relieved, and said, how can the children not have some problems? Don't worry, their temperament is almost stable, and Zijan will not go bad. Teach them, aren't you doing his ideological work? Chi Heiran sighed, the children in our family want to be as smart as Zijan, I would rather they be as sluggish as Zijin, so that no one can bully them, but they don't have much intelligence. If they really learn if Zijin is like that, then it's not shrewd, it's a dude. Being a parent is really hard, there's always a heart that can't be finished. Chi Heiran looked at the twins in his arms, and whispered to Mu Yangling, what do you think these two little things will look like in the future? Let them grow up, we just need to provide them with the teaching resources they need. Mu Yangling's heart is very broad, as long as they are not bad people. How can my master's child be a bad person? Chi Heiran muttered a few words. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1201. Fan Zijin skipped work the next day and took a few children out to see the world. Chi Heiran went to court with his hands behind his back, and Mu Yangling took the twins who were unwilling to stay at home to Wengzhou newspaper. Zioxia also brought Ziofu out, and seeing Mu Yangling with the twins, she couldn't help but smile at her, and complained in a low voice, this child heard that his father took his brothers out to play and didn't take him, so he was so angry that he rolled around at home. I don't want to play with little leopard anymore, and insist on coming out with me. It's okay, there is a children's area in the newspaper, let them play there, if not, let the nuns take them to the street for a stroll. The three children were already watching the people passing by on the street intently. Xiao Xia nodded Xiao Fu's nose and said, I take you out to play every now and then, and I didn't lock you up at home, why is it like the first time I saw you? The children ignored their mother, lying on the side of the car window and looking out, so excited that they were happy to get out anyway. The staff of Wengzhou newspaper had been recruited a long time ago, one step ahead of the Times, but there had been no movement in the past few days, and the staff of the Times newspaper thought that Wengzhou newspaper would not open. If Lin White hadn't seen his wife busy in the small study every day, he would have thought so. Now the only three newspapers that are still issued normally every day are the Times, Children's News and other three newspapers that have to choose an auspicious day, but they are almost ready, and they have given Mu Yangling a date. As long as they choose a good day to start publication, they can publish. As the behind-the-scenes boss of the newspaper, Mu Yangling is naturally inclined to Wengzhou newspaper with various resources, so she is standing in front of all the ladies at this time and said, so we want to start the publication the day before their publication, and the selection of this content is very important and in a hurry. Except for a statement from the Empress, other manuscripts must be collected from outside. Of course, if you have a good manuscript, you can also submit it. As long as it passes the editor-in-chief, I will review it with the deputy curator Lu. Can. Miss Lin's eyes lit up, she got up and asked, I have written a few poems, if they pass, can they be published? Miss Lin is the youngest daughter of Lin White and Mrs. Lin. This time, despite her mother's objection, she found Mu Yangling to work as an editor in the newspaper. If there is no manuscript more suitable than yours, but as long as it is passed, this issue will not work, and other issues will also be used. Miss Lin is satisfied. Seeing that everyone had no more questions, Mu Yangling asked everyone to review the manuscript. Mrs. Lin also stepped down as the editor-in-chief, and Mu Yangling took Xiao Xia to discuss other matters with Mrs. Hua. Regions, including the Huainan area going north, can be released on the same day to maximize the impact. Ma'am, if you explained in advance that Wengzhou Daily is a newspaper for women, will there not be many people buying it? Lu Jingshu was still a little worried. No, Mu Yangling said confidently, the Times sales channels have already matured, and the Wengzhou newspaper directly uses its channels. I believe that Wengzhou newspaper's first sale will not be weaker than that of the Times, but it's hard to say what happened after that. Mu Yangling clicked on the manuscript placed in front of him and said, so the published articles are very important, At least don't make people think that Wengzhou Daily is a place where a group of women talk about jewelry and makeup. We women should also have the heroic spirit of women. Okay, tell the world that we also have our ability to help the world. Lu Jingshu nodded slowly. Don't worry, madam, we will carefully review the manuscript. Because he made up his mind to pass the position to Xiao Xia, Mu Yangling entrusted her with a lot of work and went to review manuscripts by himself. This is also the most arduous and difficult to define work at present. It has only been 2 days since Wengzhou News called for articles, but since Mu Yangling made the news, people have been submitting articles to the palace. After the call for articles, the manuscript almost buried the newspaper. There are good articles, but there are also unsightly ones. There were even letters of advice written by old masters against the opening of the Wengzhou newspaper, and the young ladies were so angry that they stamped their pens and stamped their feet, and the movement was even louder than that of the Times next door. The editors of the Times were very disturbed when they heard the loud bang from next door. When they pricked up their ears, they could still hear the soft voice cursing. Pretty scary. Once for the first time, they heard Madame Lin's voice shouting, "Shuza dare you!" All of them looked at Lin Wide's gazes changed. Lin Wide's complexion was as usual, but he was also worried. The lady was already tough, but with an even tougher Princess Rong, can she really return to gentleness? Such a mixed manuscript made the reading speed of the young ladies increase rapidly, and Mu Yangling could even glance at it to know whether the manuscript was worth reading again. Mu Yangling dropped a manuscript that was full of ink, like graffiti, paused when he wanted to read the next one, turned around and picked up the manuscript, and frowned to identify it carefully. This article is not so much a manuscript, but half a manuscript and half a letter. The writing style is immature, and the writing is ugly, but Mu Yangling feels that his mood is like a jumping note, and he immediately cheers up. Mu Yangling put this manuscript aside alone, intending to write a review for it. When he picked up the pen, there was a scream from outside. 3 children ran in from left to right, and saw Mu Yangling rushing come over. Ziofa called out, "Fourth aunt, it's time for lunch." Little Leopard and Bezo hugged Mu Yangling's leg on one side, raised their heads and drooled and said, "I'm hungry, I want to eat." Mu Yangling could only put down his pen and look helplessly at the clock hanging on the wall, only to realize that it was indeed time for lunch. "Okay, I'll pack up and take you to dinner." The little ladies in the newspaper office stared at Sang Xiao and praised, "The children of the 2 concubines are so cute." Miss Lin, who had always been stern, also stared at the 3 children, wanting to go up to pinch their cheeks. Seeing this, Mu Yangling immediately packed up his things and took the 3 children out, and went out when he found Xiao Xia. She didn't want her son and daughter to have red marks all over their faces in a while, so let's get rid of it quickly. Xiao Xia asked Xiao Fu, "Where do you want to go for dinner?" The 3 children pointed at the Quanja building at the same time, and kept taking deep breaths, pretending to be intoxicated. The little leopard smelled the fragrance wafting in the air, and his saliva almost flowed down. Mu Yangling and Xiao Xia looked at each other, and praised with a smile, "You really have vision." Quanjalo is their family's property, and it has become one of the best restaurants in Beijing. It is the peak time for eating, and it is difficult to find a private room in it, but they are the owner, and there is a place for them all year round. Knowing that they could eat in their own restaurant, Mu Yangling and Xiao Xia happily dragged Sang Xiao over there together. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1202. The restaurant was busy, but just as they entered, shopkeeper Qian took them in. "Greetings, masters, the boxes are ready." Shopkeeper Qian was very warm to the 5 of them. The 2 male masters often came to the restaurant for dinner, but the 2 female masters and the young masters seldom came. The concubine and the young masters came here with great difficulty, and shopkeeper Qian entertained them with great enthusiasm. Mu Yangling and Xiao Xia couldn't bear the enthusiasm of the shopkeeper Qian, so they let him go down after ordering food. Shopkeeper Qian's heart trembled, and he immediately came to his senses. After all, he was a sophisticated shopkeeper. As soon as he came to his senses, he immediately showed a suitable attitude and bowed down. Seeing Mu Yangling's relieved look, Xiao Xia couldn't help laughing. "You are the master, why are you afraid of him?" "It's not that I'm afraid of him, it's that he's too enthusiastic and can't bear it." Mu Yangling poured a glass of boiled water for the children, pulled the 3 children who were running around in the box and said, "Drink some water before running." The little leopard took the cup and drank it down, then threw the cup and hugged Xiaofu, shouting happily, "I've got you." Xiaofu didn't drink any more water, he just broke free from Xiaobeizai's hand and ran. Although Xiaobeizai was smaller than Xiaofu, his figure was nimble, he blocked the person. Xiaofu had no choice but to open the door of the box happily and rushed out. Mu Yangling couldn't stop it, so he could only grab the orb and stuff it into Xiao Xia's arms, then turned around and chased after the 2 little kids. As soon as the door of the box was opened, voices from outside came in, and the 2 brats chased after him. When Mu Yangling came out, they had already run to the corridor. Mu Yangling was arrogant, and it was not easy to call them in the restaurant, and he was afraid of scaring them into accidents, so he could only speed up and rush towards them. But Xiaofu and Xiaobeizai suddenly stopped at the stairs, and looked down curiously. Mu Yangling walked behind them and saw a group of people rushing in from below, and greeted everyone, "Go and see, King," and led people to destroy all the rice fields of Rongxiang's family. Mu Yangling was stunned, and there was already a commotion below, and he shouted, "Nonsense, who doesn't know that King and Rong have a good relationship? There is no big hatred, who would do such a thing as destroying farmland?" Mu Yangling grabbed a child with one hand and walked back, saying, "If you run outside again, you will be tied up." Xiaofu said in Mu Yangling's hand, "They are talking about my father." "That's all fake, your father is very reliable." Fan Zijin was not Chi Heiran, so she didn't believe that he would do such a thing. The little leopard also jumped up and shouted, "But the second brother and the third brother are following the second uncle." Mu Yangling froze, and quickly carried the 2 children back to the box. The noisy people downstairs had already been appeased, and it was only when shopkeeper Qian appeared with a smile that everyone remembered that the restaurant seemed to belong to Prince An. Everyone shut their mouths immediately, they didn't want to offend King An on his territory. Mu Yangling called Xiaoting and said, "Go and find out what happened." She wasn't worried about those 4 brats, but she was worried about Fan Zijin. Anyway, it was common for those 4 brats to get into trouble. But it was the first time for Fan Zijin to take the children out independently. He had no experience in dealing with their troubles. If he messed up this first time, would he still be willing to take a few brats out in the future? Mu Yangling looked out of the city worried, hoping that Fan Zijin could hold on. At this time, Fan Zijin had calmed down from his madness. He looked at the people rolling in the mud, pointed to the half-destroyed farmland below and said, "Don't just stand still, keep fighting. Why don't you give me some money today? No one is allowed to leave if there is a victory or defeat." Dong Mao, who was being pressed down by the tiger's head, was taken aback for a moment, and then wanted to overturn the tiger's head with a cry of, "I had to smash the mud with my hands," and yelled, "Fan Zijin, don't go too far, you are the king of the county, and my brother-in-law is still the prime minister." Fan Zijin snorted coldly, and ordered, "Tiger head, beat him up." Hutu immediately carried out the order. Seeing this, the dude who followed Dong Mao hesitated for a while but still didn't dare to go forward. He was the son of Prince Rong, and his military strength was second. The master who doesn't suffer, and the emperor's backing, they are really afraid. So Dong Mao, who was in his 20s, was crushed and beaten by a tiger head who was only in his early teens. The little lion and Chi Wensu saw their blood boiling and jumped forward to help, so they became three gangs fighting each other. Xiaoan went to squeeze the mud ball from time to time. Come to Dongmao. Fan Zijin watched, and the anger of being interrupted finally subsided a little. When the battle was over, Fan Zijin looked at Dongmao, who was paralyzed in the mud, and said to Hutu and the little lion with disgust, "Drag him here." The tiger head and the little lion immediately dragged the person to the edge of the field with one hand, and Fan Zijin lifted up his robe in disgust and went to the next step, squatting on the field ridge and whispering to Dongmao, who was lying in the field, "You are such an idiot, if it wasn't for your brother-in-law, I wouldn't be willing to beat you up." Dongmao glared at Fan Zijin angrily, but unfortunately he didn't even have the strength to speak now, so he could only express his anger with his eyes. Fan Zijin snorted coldly, and waved to the four boys who looked like clay figurines, let's go back home." The four boys immediately walked to Fan Zijin's side with arrogance. Although Fan Zijin really wanted to beat them up, he decided to go back after seeing the onlookers. Because this incident was not planned, Fan Zijin was very unhappy. For the first time, he noticed the difference between the children and Chi Heiran. The children are equal to 4 or more Chi Heirans. In the past, he only had to wipe one Chi Heiran's ass, but now he has to clean up the mess for 4 Chi Heirans. The most important thing is that Chi Heiran listens to him, and the two cousins you can have a tacit understanding, and you can give him an order and the other party's action. But these 4 boys, when he jumped and called to stop, they kept rushing forward, and they couldn't manage at all. It was the first time that Fan Zijin experienced Mu Yangling's hardships. How did she control these brats who didn't listen to orders? Fan Zijin disliked that the 4 children were covered in mud. He looked at his gorgeous and clean carriage, and then at the horses of the guards. He hesitated for a moment about the loss of face and the damage to the carriage, and decided to make them lose face. "You guys go back on horseback. Well, by the way, smear your face with mud, so that no one can see your identities." He also said to the people who were still in the field, "If you have wronged, you can go to the capital to find me or Prince Rong, and we will definitely make decisions for you." As soon as these words came out, everyone was terrified. Is King An making up his mind to be an enemy of Prime Minister Rong? Aren't they good friends?